Yeah. Oh, hi. Oh, hi there. Chris, dude, after our call yesterday, I thought a little bit more about you writing a book. And as you noticed, I was really excited about this whole Obsidian thing. And I wanted to give you a little bit more process if you just offer you a way why and how to consider Obsidian for your work, for you writing a book. And so I put together it's going to be sort of like a demo walkthrough of how I use it to write and to come up with new ideas. And I think Obsidian is amazing for that. It's specifically targeted for that. Just to give you an example, so how to use Obsidian to write a book. You want to write a book or publish an article, and if anything, something novel, right? You want to create something new. So I know you want to write a book. I also know you read a lot. You mentioned that yesterday. You're looking in all these different places in all these different domains from, you mentioned propaganda, but also technology, and you're covering, you want to cover a broad base. And I also know from knowing you take a lot of notes. And so this is why I want you to consider Obsidian, and especially for what I call the collect, connect, and contribute process, which basically is, I didn't come up with this general process. I call it collect, connect, and contribute. And what it really is it's a process that helps you, first of all, collect ideas. That's the first step in coming up with something new, is to sort of, and I call it read to feed. This is something I think may be really interesting to you. So instead of opening a book and just reading it top to bottom and taking some notes, you are actually reading. Read to feed means really that you are hunting for ideas. Actually, I can jump into this briefly because I wrote a whole little note on it. Read to feed means to turn reading into a mission. To read is to hunt good ideas from good sources and then put them into your Obsidian. I think the most important part of this year is to read is to hunt for good ideas. So collecting ideas and hunting and really intentionally looking for core ideas. I'll give you an example, by the way, of this whole thing in a moment, which then allows me to create what I call atomic notes, which is basically one note representing one atomic idea. And you want to make sure, and you probably know this, you're a scholar anyway, so you want to capture ideas in your own words. Super important. Actually, I'm going to bold that. This is more or less an atomic note. We'll look at more soon. So collecting. After you've collected, or as you're collecting, eventually you want to start connecting. And that means you want to link and tag very liberally. The more the better. As you're seeing here, I have already created a bunch of links, some on the fly. And this linking is really fun. And I will show you an example of how that happens in the flow. It's a very flowy, very creative process anyways. And then finally, and not finally, actually, as you're doing this, you will be able to contribute new ideas because you're discovering and remixing existing things. So that is really the power of what Obsidian helps you do. And I call it creative remixing, actually. And just let's jump in there. Novel ideas are the result of connecting previously disconnected ideas, and it's a very human thing to connect. And I have a few examples, just what does it mean to creatively remix. I have some examples because, as you can tell, I'm nerding out. A radio connected to a phone book is a mobile phone. A small piece of paper connected to light adhesive is a post-it note. Protein powder connected to full spectrum vitamins becomes meal replacement. So the idea is, and that's the case for making atomic notes, is to keep those units so small, few lines, that you can easily remix them and just mash them up. And as you saw, I'm going to open up the graph that you saw yesterday. I've got a bunch of these atomic notes that I'm remixing all the time, and then I come up for new connections on the fly quite a bit. Cool. So that's all fine. I wanted to show you an example to give this a little bit more like process. So collect ideas. So let's say you're reading a book, right? Which is something you mentioned you're doing. Let's say you're reading a book called The Motivation Myth. This is an example of something I sort of wrote down. And let's say you're starting with a blank slate. You have the book next to you and you're taking some pencil notes. And over time, let's say over time, like the first thing you want to, what I do is to write, the title and maybe some tags. I do like tags. I'm getting more of them. And then as I'm reading it, okay, here we go. As I'm reading it, let's just pretend like we start out with a flat, empty file. At some point, very quickly, usually, you write down the core idea. And the core idea of this is you don't need motivation to start. So this is, in my own words, the core of what I'm reading. As I'm continuing reading, maybe I will expand a little bit. So I'm going to copy this over here. You don't need motivation to start. Actually, it's the other way around. You have to start in order to feel progress, in order to feel successful, in order to feel motivated. So that is, in a atomic level, the core idea. But then obviously it's a book, and I went on, I read, and then I noticed that there were these other sort of key ideas. The first one is starting is hard, as we all know. And so the guy makes a call for use a process. So you want to find a process first, blah blah blah. Like there's some content here that I just transcribed or that I sort of wrote down in my own word. That is the core idea of this note is, you need a process. And also, just so you've seen it, there's a little bit more advanced, but I figured I could visualize this really well. Obsidian allows you to do these little graphs. And if I render this page, this is basically process leads to progress, leads to success, leads to motivation, leads to going back to process. So just so you've seen it, you can do like these little things, these little graphs. Okay, so we have, as you can tell, I went through this book. I created some other very short atomic notes for a few more things that I really liked. I'm not going to go into this because let's say we have collected this book, right? If we go back to our flow, we have collected an idea, right? I went and hunted for ideas, and then I created atomic notes, bam. And now this is the interesting part, and is connecting these ideas. So if we go back and say, I'm reading this through the next day, I'm like, yeah, okay, so process, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh, wait, like 2-3 months ago, I remember I was so into processes. So I'm like, I'm going to create some links to, or create a related. This reminds me of process, the digital garden process. And yeah, and since we're talking about processes, I had another thing called the Obsidian workflow, and I had another thing, process, daily note launchpad process, whatever. And then actually, this reminds me, and this is where it gets interesting. I read a book once by a painter and the book is called the Practice of Daily Painting. So the daily practice of painting. And out of a sudden, this is becoming less nerdy and more, now we're into like branching off into maybe painting or my progress in going to the gym or something, right? So you basically can start connecting from your previous ideas and previous notes. You can start connecting new or prior ideas. This is really, really powerful. And let's say, and so we have that. Now we created the breakdown. We have maybe connected a few ideas. I've created some links to other ideas. And now I think the interesting question could be, how do you what do you take out of this? And what I suggest is following the links, basically. So we just, we created a related, we added some more context from our own personal experience. And just so you've seen it, I'm going to open a local graph, which is those dots for this specific file. So I feel like this is really the core, and this is really interesting. And I'm going to expand a little bit. So now I'm going to start researching what's really sort of in this space for me. So this is what is called a local graph. And as you can see, here in the middle is starting hard, use a process, which is this node here, right? And I'm starting to, well, this may be a little bit too crowded. Let's say the depth of the graph is just two levels. So, oops. So starting hard is hard. Use a process. So let's see. So this is related to all these other. Right. I have the dopamine fast rules. So I will actually add that dopamine fast rules, or just the dopamine fast, which is a process. Nice. So actually, and I didn't. I think there's something about maybe starting and motivation and dopamine, and there's something that is related. There's the daily practice of painting, which brings us at some point to, I hadn't thought about this. There is something about starting as hard and using a process and having making yourself a goal for 100 days. So I like that 100 days project. You know how Alex Proba did a poster a day thing, or I've done the meditation every day for 100 days. So I think this is the power, is that, and even New York is coming up. So there's two hops between starting is hard and using a process, and why using a process is important, and my experience in New York. So I could maybe start telling a story. I don't know what's in here. We jumped into New York. There's a bunch of stories, and So what I'm trying to say is you can now start exploring basically your own brain. What we're doing here is actually we're exploring my brain, and we're doing that out in the open, and not while I don't have to think about this. This is being presented to me. And now I could start thinking, well, maybe there's a story in New York that happened 20 years ago that led me to my obsession with, daily practice. And that eventually became my interest into processes. And then I could say, well, what are processes? I don't even know what is a process, or whatever. You could go in so many directions. And I think just to sort of, what I could now do is create a new file, my book about processes and motivation, and now I can say somehow New York was related, daily practice, painting. I have the motivation myth. The book. Then we have, is that in trees? That's actually not the right one. But anyways, we have maybe the something else. Dopamine fast, I think, is relevant. So I can maybe outline or something. Sort of taking everything that I just looked at when we were looking at this, the graph, the local graph, as you remember, and we made it so that the depth is maybe 2. It helps me sort of come up with these new ideas. Examples of 100-day projects. I took a lot of notes there. Then there's the first 20 hours book, right? So that actually I think should be really in there, related. This is actually really the first 20 hours book, actually which I took. So, and so forth, and so forth. So basically what I'm showing you here is, and we're gonna go back to how to use Obsidian to write a book, because this is what this is really about. I just gave you an example of, we collected ideas from a book, we connected them, we actually continued to connect them while we were working on it, and then we started to come up with new, interesting, unexpected ideas and narratives. Let me know what you think. This was sort of impromptu for me, and I don't know if this is interesting or helps. But yeah, if you want to remember one thing, the collect, connect, contribute, collect, read to feed, connect, and publish, or even here, collect ideas and read to feed, create atomic nodes, link and tag liberally. Actually, I'm going to write a little bit about that later. This is something interesting for me for this process. And then finally, contribute novel, let's call them novel ideas, because that's really what this is about. It's about like really pushing out knowledge, and that happens through creative remixing. I hope this was interesting. Let me know if you have any questions. I will talk to you soon.